Hello students, thanks for watching. Today we're going to talk about investment appraisal. Imagine you have finally made it as an entrepreneur. You have a successful business. You're surrounded by employees. You have your own office. It feels good. And you are finally able to start thinking beyond survival and into possibly making some investments. People are going to call you. They're going to want things from you. They're going to want you to invest in equipment or vehicles. And you need an easy way to determine which investment is best for you. Should you invest in none of these ideas? Should you invest in one over the other? We'll need to use investment appraisal in order to do that. Before we discuss the appraisal techniques, we need to define a few terms. Typically, when we talk about investment, we're discussing purchasing capital goods. When a person discusses investment, we're talking about putting our money in the stock market or having a retirement account or things like that. When a business talks about investment, this is what we're talking about, usually machinery or technology. Investment appraisal is specifically using quantitative techniques to determine whether or not we want to make that investment. We use numbers. So let's talk about different things that we can calculate. The first thing is we need to know the initial cost of the investment and the forecasted net returns from the investment. So how much will it cost to do this investment, and what will be returned to us if we make that investment. And once we have those two figures, the first thing that might be useful is using the payback method to calculate the payback period. This is the length of time that it will take for your investment to pay back. So let's go over some numbers real quick. Our formula for payback period, it's measured in time, and it's the initial cost of the investment over the annual net returns from the project. So let's look at an example. If an investment requires 100,000 yen of startup and it expects to repay 20,000 yen every year, naturally we can determine the payback period is going to be 5 years. It will take 5 years for you to get your 100,000 yen back. Another example, 200,000 yen, and it returns 75,000 yen each year. Well, we can do some quick math and determine, it's a little more complicated, but it's going to be about 2 years and 8 months. Now, if you do the math and follow the formula, you'll get something like 2.667 years. We need to express that in terms of years and months. So my method, the quick, easy way to do it, is to take that 2.667, subtract the 2 off because we know it's 2 years, and we're left with 0.667 of a year. Multiply that by 12, and you'll get something like 8, and that is the number of months that we have. The next thing that we can calculate is our average rate of return. So if we have our initial cost of the investment and our forecasted net returns of the project, we can figure out in terms of profit what percentage of our initial investment will be returned to us each year. That's our average rate that our investment will return back to us. Let's take a look at the formula for that. Our average rate of return is our annual net returns from the project over the initial cost times 100. Now we can look at it and use some common sense as well. In the same way, if the initial cost of the investment is 100,000 yen and we get the 20,000 in return, well, we have 20% that is going to be returned to us. Now, for the purposes of this course, we are considering the returns, the net returns, to be the same as profit. It's more complicated than that, but at this level, we're simplifying it in that way. So we're going to get 20% of that 100,000 yen to return to us each year. The same problem again, 200,000 yen investment, we get 75,000 yen return each year. So we can do some quick math and determine we're going to get 37.5% of our investment to return to us each year. Okay, this is probably how it's going to be presented to you, however. So if any of that was complicated, don't worry about it, because we're going to walk through a pretty simple way to put all of our numbers together to calculate everything that we need. Here is a quick problem. I typed this up, but it's pretty similar to something that I've seen on previous exams, and it gives us all the information we need. It gives us some background information. Feel free to pause and read about cool boxes. Okay, after they give us the background information, they give us a lot of numbers. They give us the startup costs for each investment, and they give us the expected returns for each investment. Notice that they're giving us two options, option A and option B. We are going to solve for option A first. So, they might ask you to solve the payback period and the average rate of return for each one. Let's do it. Easiest way to do it, and the way that they might actually ask you to do it to show your work, is to create a table. And on that table, we're going to list our years, our annual net cash flows, and then we're going to have our running total, our cumulative cash flows. So the first thing we need to do is put our annual net cash flows in the column. Now the very first one, year 0, that is the exact moment that we decide we are going to do this investment. It is the startup costs. It's $1 million. So we put a negative $1 million on year 0. That's it. Then we're going to list the net cash flows that they give us for option A for each year. It's very common to see different cash flows for each year, and this better simulates what might happen in real life. In reality, we're not going to get the exact same returns each year for most investments. So we've done it here. We've listed them all out. And what we need to do is calculate our cumulative cash flows by doing a running total. So naturally, year 0, we are still in the hole, negative $1 million. But after 1 year, we have gained a little. So we're going to add 350 to that, 350,000. And that's going to give us 650,000 negative. We can do the same for year 2 and arrive at negative 300,000. Now I stopped here to show that we can see what's happening between year 2 and 3, is that we are crossing over and becoming profitable. We're no longer negative, we're going to have a positive number. So we take negative 300,000, we add 400,000 to it, and we arrive at 100,000. This is a great moment. We have become profitable. Our investment is starting to return to us. So we'll finish out the table and we'll continue to add to everything. And we can see at the end we arrive at $550,000. Now, what can we do with these numbers? Well, we need to calculate our payback period. So I put a line in the table exactly when we see that it crosses from negative to positive cumulative cash flows. At some point between year 2 and 3, our investment pays itself back. We have gotten this $1 million back. So how do we calculate the exact years and months? Well, we can see and just kind of use our common sense, it's going to be 2 years. But there are some months there, so let's figure that out. One way, for those of you who like formulas and don't want to just stare at it and think about it, is the amount needed in order to break even or to pay back is 300,000. Well, what amount did we actually get that year? We got 400,000. So you can take the number needed, the amount needed, and you can put it over the amount we received through net inflows, and you'll get something like this. 300,000 over 400,000 equals 0.75. So we take 0.75, we multiply it by 12, and we get 9 months. So payback period is 2 years and 9 months. That's pretty good. The next thing we need is the average rate of return for this investment, and this one is a little more complicated. But first thing we need to do is add up all of our positive cash flows. So we have 350 350, 400, 200, 150, 100. All of our numbers that are positive under annual net cash flows should be added up. In this case, we get a total of 1,550,000. These are all the positive cash flows we're getting. But we will need to subtract out the initial cost of the investment. So that has to be accounted for, and we arrive at a number like $550,000. This is for our course, How Profitable the Investment Is. We divide it by the lifespan of the project. So we need to figure out how this $550,000 is spread out over the 6-year period. And so we're going to get an average annual return of $91,667 because we take the number and we put it over 6 years. The last thing we're going to do is take that number that we get, our annual returns, and we put it over the initial cost of the investment. We're doing this because we're trying to figure out the percentage of that investment that will be returned to us each year. So we have our annual returns and we need to divide it by the initial investment. And once we do that, we get a number like 0.091 and we turn it into a percentage, 9.1%. So our average rate of return for option A is 9.1%. We are going to get 9.1% of our initial cost of investment returned to us each year. Let's take a look at this now. Make a table and try to calculate option B. First, you're going to want to make a table, and then you're going to want to calculate the payback period and the average rate of return. Go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, let's take a look at what we got here. Hopefully your table looks something like this. We have in year 0, negative $2 million. So we put that under annual net cash flows and cumulative cash flows. Then we continue to add our positive cash inflows each year until we arrive at $1 million. That's what this should return to us. Now we can see this one's a little easier. We have a 0 over there on cash inflows. So at the end of 5 years, we are exactly at 0. Let's look at these numbers. If you got this, that's great. The payback period is 5 years, and the rate of return is 8.3%. We followed the same methods. We add up all of the annual positive net cash flows. We subtract the initial cost of investment. We put it over the number of years, and then we calculate it as a percentage. We should arrive at 8.3%. Some people ask, how far do you need to go on the percentages? Do you need to give me 5 and 6 numbers past the decimal place? I just use 1. I think that's acceptable. Okay, so let's take a look at these two options next to each other. Now this is how you might see a lot of questions relating to these. They'll give you 2 options, and then they'll ask you to calculate these figures, and then finally they're going to want you to give some recommendations to the business. Which one should they do? Should they do option A or should they do option B? The honest truth is that there are ways to argue each side. The numbers do look better for option A, however. We have a payback period that is shorter, and we have a rate of return that is greater. However, as many students will point out, option B leads to more profitability. Okay, so why do we need to consider payback? It is actually more complicated than it seems. We learned in the previous chapter the importance of cash flow timings. So if we can see when an investment will pay back, it allows us to properly make a cash flow forecast and to make business plans based on when we're going to start to see positive cash flow from this. It should be noted that the longer the payback period, the more interest you're going to have to pay. So option A will pay back more quickly. If we take out a loan for this, there are fewer years that we'll have to pay interest on it. That's one thing to consider. It's longer that you're without cash. We discussed the importance of having cash in hand already. So if the payback period is shorter, then I have more time with cash in hand, more things that I can do. If the payback period is longer, it's more risky. You never know when external things will change in the environment. So the price of oil or commodities could go up. The market could change. Technology could arrive. Anything could happen to make your investment worthless by the time it starts paying back. So the quicker that we can get it paying back, the better it is. Also, if you're in the HL course, we've talked about the net present value of our profits. So money in the future is generally worth less than money right now. Now, it might be tempting as an individual to say, oh, hey, why is it better to have a shorter payback? Because you get your money back faster. But we need to consider some of these more advanced and topic-driven answers. Okay, so why is it important to calculate and understand and consider the average rate of return? Well, unlike payback, this really allows us to consider the profitability of a project. It can tell us whether it's a good idea to take out loans by comparing interest rates. If we see that our rate of return is only going to be 2% and the interest rate on a loan is going to be 3%, well, we're going to lose money. Businesses also need to consider their criterion rate. That is a minimum number that a business should determine needs to be met in order for them to consider an investment. If we establish a criterion rate of 10%, then we do it ahead of time before we start thinking about the investment, before we start getting our emotions and excitement involved. And if it doesn't meet our 10% criterion rate, we simply cannot consider it. If it exceeds it, then let's move on and discuss it. So that's an important topic to understand, the criterion rate, and it's some good advice to give to a business who's thinking about investment. Okay, last thing. Before an investment is made, you need to consider the payback. This allows you to figure for cash flow timing. You also need to consider the average rate of return. This allows you to consider for profitability. In the previous chapter, we discussed the differences between cash flow and profitability. And before you make an investment, these are two things that you simply must factor in and consider and understand before you decide to make the investment. So we have these new, great, useful tools, and we know how to calculate them, and we know how to use them in the event that someone approaches us wanting us to make an investment. That is it. I do appreciate you watching. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in class.